All right, good evening, everyone. We'll make a start. Thank you, everyone, for coming and welcome to this meeting of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee. We'll start with declarations of interest. Do any members have any interests to declare? No? All right, great. We have some apologies. We have apologies from Councillors Kilbane, Clark, Nichols and Ravilius. I think everybody else is here. Next item is minutes, approval of the minutes from the last meeting on the 13th of June. I had one comment on the minutes, which is on page 8 of our agenda. In the first paragraph, it says the applicant did not have a connection with Gladstone Garage. I don't recall the applicant actually stating that, so I don't feel like that's accurate record. I was wondering if anyone else on the committee had any comments on that particular part of the minutes. Yeah, Councillor Rose.
Well, the applicant wasn't there, so it would be, to the best of the recollection of the lawyer of the applicant, there was no formal direct relationship between them, I think was the wording that was used on the day. So I think we have to appropriately coach our language the way that they did to be accurate. So I agree with you on that.
And so can we check the webcast just to make sure that whatever is in the minutes is an accurate reflection of what was conveyed at the time? Are people happy with that? Any other changes to the minutes? Yes, Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair. On page 3, just before paragraph 1, election of Vice Chair, I think it was for the continuum rather than for the meeting, the remainder of the administration.
I'm not sure that at the time that was how it was worded when people voted on it.
Gosh. In which case, you may need to rectify that position. Thank you, Chair.
We'll take some advice on it because I don't think it's a committee decision to elect the vice chair. So we'll find out what the procedure is and get back to you on that. Okay. Anything else in the minutes to change, or can we approve them as an accurate record subject to those changes? People happy to approve them? Nods. Okay, great. Thank you. In that case, the next agenda item is public participation. We have one person registered to speak today who is with us in person, William Swords. I think you've done this before, haven't you? So you know how it works. You're welcome to come and join us at the table. There's a microphone there. If you just turn that on. And then in your own time, just get started whenever you're ready. You have 3 minutes. I'm not sure we need one because
I think we should.
I'm here.
But if you're unwell, or I think it's just the done thing that we should have a vice chair.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, if the committee would like to elect a vice chair for this meeting, do you have a nomination? Councillor Cuthbertson, and seconded as well? Yeah, should take a vote on that. Everyone who would like to elect Councillor Cuthbertson as vice chair for this meeting? All right, great. Thank you. All right, Mr. Swords.
Good evening, everyone. I attended the previous meeting and asked you to reconsider the policy you introduced regarding the 10 Hackney plates that remain unissued. I was hoping for an update, however, I see it's not on today's agenda. I don't know what the process is, whether you have other meetings to discuss this and other issues. I am therefore once again asking you to reconsider your decision. I won't trouble you with all the points I raised at the previous meeting, other than to say at that time we had 3 such vehicles working. 2 drivers have subsequently sold theirs as they are neither financially nor operationally viable. I am happy to make myself available for any meetings to answer any questions you may have regarding my views on the unissued plates. But also, as I've got 3 minutes, I thought I'd use my time to raise another issue to do with taxis as well, which is tinted windows in taxis. Couple of questions first. What is the council's policy on tinted windows? And secondly, why do we have it? I'd like to read a couple of paragraphs from the Department of Transport, Taxi and Private Hire Vehicle Licensing Best Practice Guidance for licensing authorities in England. Which is quite a big bit of paper. But basically, the rules for tinted window vehicles are available on gov.uk. For most cars on the road today, the minimum light transmission for windscreens is 75% and 70% for front and side windows. Vehicles may be manufactured with glass that is darker than this fitted to windows rearward of the driver, especially in luxury estate and people style carrier vehicles. If the objective of the authority's prohibition of tinted windows is to address a concern that illegal activity is taking place in a vehicle, the evidence for this should be established and alternative options should be considered. For example, CCTV in vehicles. When licensing vehicles, authorities should be mindful of this, as well as the significant costs and inconvenience associated with changing glass that conforms with the requirements of vehicle construction regulations. In the absence of evidence to show that a requirement for the removal of factory-fitted windows is necessary and proportionate, licensing authorities should not require their removal as part of a vehicle specification. However, authorities should carefully consider the views of the public and the trade when considering the acceptance of aftermarket tinting. That's from the said document. As we are not asking for aftermarket tinting on windows, which should not need to consult on this matter. It may seem like an insignificant part of taxi licensing. However, it has been and remains an issue for a number of years. It has become more difficult to source vehicles, particularly luxury estate and people carrier types of vehicles, without factory fitted tinted windows. Some are just not made without them now.
Would you mind trying to draw your comments to a close? You've had 3 minutes now. We can continue this discussion another time, but do you mind trying to wrap up?
3 minutes?
Yeah, it's been 3.5, yeah.
It's longer than that. Well, as the cost of changing windows increasing all the time, it's also a major bone of contention when we see vehicles licensed by other authorities allowed to work here with tinted windows. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I'll take that issue up with you and with officers.
No, it's okay. I thought I'd do it.
It's got quite a limited
Time myself, but not very well.
in public participation.
Okay, thank you.
We'll discuss it further in another context. Thank you for your time today and coming in to speak to us. Thank you. Okay, that's our only registered public participant for this meeting. So we'll move on to agenda item 4. No, there's only one more item on the agenda, and it's to do with licensing hearings for a different part of licensing policy. All right. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is about the format of licensing hearings for the 2003 Act and Gambling 2005 Act. This is something that we've discussed amongst ourselves a little bit privately, but I wanted it to be discussed in a public forum so we can take a formal decision on this as a committee, because the format of licensing hearings currently is a product of the pandemic and regulations and needing to change the format. So Leslie, are you happy to introduce your report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this report has been put together as requested by the Chair so that members can make a decision on this matter. Just to let everybody know, whether we do meetings in person or remotely, we are doing them in accordance with the legal requirements and both the Licensing Act and the Gambling Act and the associated regulations. So both means are legal at this time. And there is also the potential of, we don't know when, but if sometime in the future, being actual case law in this matter, which will determine it for the entire country once a case law comes in So members are asked today to determine how we hold licensing subcommittee hearings moving forward. We as a council, in accordance with the requirements of the 2003 and 2005 Act, have established a licensing committee. You are said committee, and that committee then can serve on subcommittee hearings to determine licensing applications. We have never actually had a licensing subcommittee hearing with regard to a gambling application, but as you will all know, we've had more than I care to remember with regarding premise applications under the 2003 Act. Prior to the pandemic, all of our hearings were held in person. And due to the pandemic, of course, they had to be held remotely. And we are one of the authorities that have continued to hold them remotely following other meetings going back to being in person. As you can see from the report, I have contacted a few other authorities to find out how they're doing hearings. I haven't done a formal consultation on this. I haven't had the opportunity, but I have consulted a few other councils to find out how they're holding meetings. And since the report was published, East Riding Council have also let me know that they hold their meetings in person. I also consulted some agents of applicants and representatives that we have dealt with. I've also consulted the police to find out their views, because of course they do hearings within the rest of North Yorkshire as well as in York. And at point 11, there's some of their comments with regards to how they find hearings, whether they're downsides and upsides of whether they're in person or held remotely. I've also asked officers for some feedback with regards to how some of the pros and cons that we find with regards to remote hearings and in-person hearings. I think the biggest issue that everybody will agree with a remote hearing is losing your internet connection. We've all had that. I know that Councillor Mason lost his connection briefly this afternoon and had to come back into the meeting. And of course, the internet connection, not everybody has Wi-Fi at home and those type of things. And personally, I have had to ring into a meeting before because I lost my internet connection. And it's not pleasant being on the end of a phone trying to do a hearing. Personally, I didn't like that one. It's only happened to me once. But again, we've also got the same things about being in meetings, being in person. Everybody has to come to this building, and the difficulties that could be for some people trying to attend West offices for the meetings. So I've put 4 options together in the report. Option 1, determine that Licensing Act and Gambling Act subcommittee hearings continue to be held remotely. Determine that Licensing Act and Gambling Act subcommittee hearings are held in person, stipulating an implementation date for when that change will take effect. Option 3, determine that the format of subcommittee hearings will be determined on a case-by-case basis, depending on the nature of the application and the number of representations. That the vice chair and the chair and vice chair of this committee will agree a procedure to aid officers when determining the format of a meeting. Again, stipulating an implementation date. And option 4, determine that the format of subcommittee hearings will be held in a hybrid format, with members and officers attending West offices in person and the applicant and representatives being given the option to attend in person or remotely. Again, we'd have to have an implementation date for when that takes effect. As already stated, all of the hearing formats would be lawful in accordance with the Acts and the relevant regulations. We've already got established procedures in place for holding hearings in person and for holding them remotely. Option 3 and option 4 would create some additional work, because we would have to have procedures put in place of how they would work, and definitely with option 3, how we would determine the criteria for on a case-by-case basis of what would be remote or what would be in person. So they're the options before you today. I know that's quite a few of you are new to this committee, so I've maybe only done one hearing so far, and some of you have done a lot more than that, so you will also have your own views on how you found the two procedures.
Thank you very much for the report and for gathering all the information together for us to consider. If members have any questions for officers, then there is also one of the council solicitors online who hopefully can hear us. So yes, if anybody has any questions. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, just I guess a clarity question. One of the feedback points that we got was that the best situation would be default in person, but with remote as an option. Another option might be giving the person who's applying the choice of whether they wanted an online hearing or an in-person meeting. So they're not options 1 to 4, but they might be option 3, but a little bit easier than having to create an entire process of determining because you put the choice in front of somebody. So just asking, is that something that could be an option, or is that not an option for some reason?
I think it might be difficult if we gave the applicant the option, because the applicant's option might not be what the representative might want, and the representative could argue back that they've not been given a fair hearing. I would much rather it be our decision of how a hearing is held and not down to the applicant or a representative determining how it's held.
Councillor Wells?
Thank you, Chair. Can I, in the list of agents of applicants and their feedback, did the police actually have a view? Because it's all different views here, and I just wondered what the police view was.
The police, of course, as well as doing York, do the rest of your North Yorkshire, and the North Yorkshire. I know North Yorkshire is now one authority, but they still do have their areas. Everybody that's responded to me, they have gone back into in-person meetings, but our police licensing officer does prefer them remotely. But that is just one person's view.
Councillor Mason?
Thank you. When we did it in-person meetings, they were never webcast, I presume on the basis that people could turn up here and watch it in person. And then obviously we did webcast them, obviously during the pandemic, I suppose it'd been a kind of private Zoom. Where I suppose going forward in terms of obviously discuss his cost, what would the difference be in cost in having it in person? Because obviously we'd still have the person we've got now that does the technical side, you know, doing the Zoom side of it to make it available to the public, opposed to just doing it in here and doing it webcast. I'm trying to work out, I suppose, where that. Basically, we're already paying for that person to come here and webcast it. What's the difference if it's online or in here?
From as you'll know, whether they're online or in person, we have a webcast person. There were never webcast previously. I would like to think if we did go back to in-person meetings, that we do have them webcast. I think that gives an opportunity for those representatives who don't necessarily want to come and speak at the hearing still to be able to watch it if they wish. So whether we're online or in person, we would still need the aid of the webcast team to help facilitate that. And the cost of being in person would be the room that we're taking up, because the officers are still, whether on online or in person, you've still got officer time. So there's no cost. So the only cost I can foresee is the fact that we would need a room in this building.
Councillor Kent?
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, could we amend, or could option 3 include something to say that any contested hearings are in person, but uncontested hearings can be online? That would seem to make sense to me. But
The only reason we have a hearing is because the application's contested.
I'm sorry. So a representative, we have had, I'm told it's very rare, but I've had hearings where there's been a representative, but they're not choosing to attend. So effectively, there's an objection, but it's not live, if you like.
One of the slight issues we may have with that there's a very strict legal process with regards to a hearing. So as soon as the 28 days representation period ends, we've then got 20 working days to hold a hearing. And within those 20 days, things have to be done within certain days. And one of those things is we have to advertise how we're holding the hearing, where it's going to be, the date and time. So, and it's only 5 days before the, no, is it less than 5 days before the hearing that people have to confirm attendance? I can't remember, but you confirm attendance after we've set the date and time and whatever of the hearing. So we couldn't work it like that, I'm afraid.
Councillor Cuthbertson?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the relatively recent ruling that justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done, which Councillor Kent will probably tell us which King's Bench Division Court it was. But just a thought, it is relatively recent. It's thought to be an ancient principle. I certainly go for that. Having said that, I appreciate the convenience where it's not necessary for people to appear and give a lengthy speech or more during the hearing, to have those such hearings held remotely. So I think option 3 is basically what seems to be a preferred issue. That's judging from 1 or 2 nods at the table when it was announced. I didn't see the person next to me, I'm sorry. I think the question is, to what extent do you want to be flexible? And if you have got to advertise it within a certain number of working days of the period starting, then those criteria and the route through them must be fairly seamless and easy to follow. So for me, I prefer a sort of an option 3 with perhaps 1 or 2 tweaks to add to the accessibility and transparency of the meeting.
Could we try and do questions first, just so we make sure everyone has all the information they need, and then talk about maybe specific proposals? That's totally fine, but just in terms of trying to have some sort of structure, if that makes sense. Councillor Hook.
Thank you. It's just that because there are problems with internet, and I personally have them, which is why I had to come in the office today, really. I mean, would there be something to put in extra modems for officers and members that don't have the necessary internet that's reliable enough or something? Because at the moment, I wouldn't like to swear I would come to a licensing hearing again, I think, if it's going to be online.
Thank you. Councillor Smalley?
Mine's a proposal, not a question.
Do you mind hanging on to it just a minute then? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thanks. I suppose the picture is we'd have a date suggested to members, and then if you can't get a panel a bit like today, then we change the date. I suppose that still gives us that little bit of flexibility if we wanted a remote option. So if you couldn't get the members to agree a date, you could then look at a second round of asking people. But with a remote date, would that be a halfway house maybe that meets what we're saying, that if we can't get together physically, there's a backup?
As long as it's done within the regulation timeframe for publishing the information about the hearing, that could be the case, yeah.
Councillor Widdowson?
It is a question. Could you just remind me, Leslie, how many of North Yorkshire's licensing committees are held online versus in person, please?
From the responses that I received, Scarborough, Craven and Rydale and Selby areas are in person. The other, Harrogate and whichever else, didn't respond to my request.
So that's from all the people you asked, they're all back in person that responded, sorry.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Kent?
So this is an opinion. I'm not sure it's a question. I don't know. When do you want me to voice that?
Does anybody else have any questions, or do people feel like they've got all the answers that they need? So in that case, it sounded like councillors Cuthbertson and Smalley maybe had something that they wanted to suggest, and then I'll come to you after that. Is that all right? Yeah. So councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you. I wonder what members would think to the idea that we would effectively default to in person unless there were no representatives or I think my problem with this is that if there's anybody's convenience to be served, it should be that of the applicant and the representatives first and members second. I think everybody would agree with that.
No.
No? Right. Well, it depends on how you see justice being served. So it seems to me that it's just a question of getting a sort of a sieve of tests that can be applied fairly quickly and can be where the information can be got quite quickly, which would allow you very quickly to say this one, according to our rationale, is an in-person one. This one could be potentially hybrid, or this one could be totally remote.
Do you have any specific ideas of what the kind of considerations would need to be?
I think whether representatives want to appear and speak, that you can accept a written submission from a representative, which is equally valid, isn't it? I'm looking at Leslie there.
Yes, whether a representative attends in person or it's
Okay.
just in writing, they have to be taken into consideration.
I assume we would continue with the same basis, that we would only have a hearing where there was a representation that objected to the license. And I would guess that, like today's hearing, where the police and the public protection team mediated with the applicant and with I think another objector, I could be wrong, to make certain changes to the operating schedule. You might choose then not to have a hearing if that had been accepted by the applicant and there was no representative objecting to that schedule. So I think you can actually derive those tests fairly straightforwardly. You're not asking me to do it now, are you?
Yeah, you've confused me a little bit, I must admit. We would, however we hold a meeting in the future, a hearing, we would need a clear protocol, because you've just made the suggestion there that I think you just made the suggestion there that a representative will determine whether we do them in person or remotely. And then we're back to the fact of we've already had the suggestion that an applicant makes that suggestion. And I would prefer it that we look at the application that's before us and the number of representatives and make that we've written a good procedure, and that procedure, when you follow it, determines how we hold.
Chair, well, yes, thank you, Leslie. I mean, that's very clear. I think to some extent you need to have some kind of balance between applicant and representatives in terms of driving the hearing in that way, but I'm sure it could be done straightforwardly. James Street has got a wonderful way of coming up with protocols.
Councillor Smalley.
Thank you, Chair. I think most people, from what's been said, are sort of leaning towards that generally hearings should be held in person, following practice across the county, and what we were doing prior to COVID, recognising that there are situations where that might be very difficult, both from the application's point of view, but actually the sheer number of people that might want to turn up. So I remember, I think you were on the York Festival hearing, that was crackers, that we were based in the snow room and people basically couldn't get in. And we had to the meeting that we held in the community, had over 80 people attending. But there's no way, even if we had it in this room, that you'd be able to have a sort of a sensible hearing in that room. So I think that there's clearly examples where, and that was, we could easily foresee an example where you're licensing something much larger than that and you have much more public interest. So, but I do completely accept the point that you can't have a situation where applicants or those wanting to participate that can just decide on what they want. So I think just to sort of try to draw this, move this forward, I think what I'm trying to suggest is option 2 with a sort of light option 3 bolt on, which is that generally hearings are in person, but the chair and vice chair of the committee or panel members that are actually taking that decision have the opportunity, should the situation arise, to have that hearing held virtually. And obviously if there were lots of if the applicant was writing in, then that'd be something that the chair and vice chair would take into account, like they would participants.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
I'm probably repeating what Councillor Smalley said, but I strongly feel that they should return to being in person. Nearly all court proceedings have returned to being in person where possible. No other court forum takes account of what the applicant or the representatives want. It's about justice being seen to be done. It's about a certain amount of formality in one place. York is quite small. If all these other authorities, which have a much larger distance for people to travel to, are managing in person, I can't see why anyone is being particularly disadvantaged in York. But in any event, that's not actually the purpose of this hearing. There is a certain amount of formality to it, and I think it ought to resume, possibly with the caveats that Councillor Smalley has said. As an addendum, I'd say, whilst obviously it's great if we webcast them, this isn't a court of record. Magistrates' courts are not courts of record. Proceedings are not routinely recorded by webcam or anything else, and so there's no obligation on us to do that. So that's optional.
Okay, well, it sounds like something's been proposed and seconded, but I'd like if we could discuss it a little bit more because some more people had their hands up. Councillor Hook was next, and then Councillor Waters, and then I've just seen a couple more hands. I'll make a note of them.
Me, was it? Yeah, thank you, Chair, again. It's just, I feel that you should really try and have one rule for everything, so then people know what they're doing. And there's nothing more frustrating on being online. You don't know body language, you get cutting out, bad signals starting to happen, people on mute when they shouldn't be on mute, and vice versa, and hearing rustling because they think they're on mute and they're not. And it's just so disconcerting. And whereas when you're actually in person, you get to see the people, see what they're really doing, and see whether they look a bit worried, and you can reassure them. And it's just so much better being in person. That's what I think. And I would go for everything being in person, because I think if it was a real big public interest one, all the more reason to be in person rather than having a lot of anonymous faces all scattered all around the screen that you couldn't see and having to scroll around backwards and forwards.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Must be about 20 years ago now. I remember the excellent old Labour councillor Liz Edge ridiculing the fact that the council would sit and hold meetings to discuss meetings. I just found this slightly surreal, and I'm just hoping we do move it on fairly quickly with option 2 as it's written, no amendments to it, and let's just vote on it. It's long overdue that it's a return to this system. And as you see from page 14 and 15, all the other local authorities around us are doing exactly as we should be doing, returning to in-person hearings.
Thank you. A couple more people have their hands up, and I want to make sure they have a chance to express their opinions. So Councillor Rose and then Councillor Widdowson, and then we can probably move, and then Councillor Mason, then we can probably move towards the vote and get on with it. Yeah.
One quick point of correction. The information we got given is that the 3 nearest to us, Selby, Hull and Leeds, are all in person with the ability to go remote. So they aren't option 2, they are option 3. And I back option 3 myself as well, because I think, yes, we can go back to how it's been done before. And I suspect a lot of the North Yorkshire return to how it has been before is because they need to try and align their policies ahead of what they're going to have to do over the next year. And I don't envy that task. But it is the easy option, is just to go, well, we did it before, it was only because of the pandemic. But actually, we know that online has opened up options for us. We know that technology struggled in the council at the start of the pandemic, so it wouldn't have really been an option before the pandemic anyway. But we're in a situation now where we can genuinely weigh up the options. And from an accessibility point of view, there are plenty of circumstances I can think of where it is better for the applicant from a fairness perspective to have it online. Plenty of people are applying when they are generally further away, or they're visiting ill family, or whatever circumstances from a distance perspective, or they have their own personal challenges with our building or other needs. So I can see situations where personally I think it absolutely should be online. And I don't know about everybody else, but certainly since becoming a councillor, I've had situations where I wouldn't have been at a meeting unless it was online. So that it opens options. I agree with the room that in person is a slightly easier time of things with lower risk and less goes wrong. So I back that point. But I guess I'm leaning more towards the broad Cuthbertson, Smalley, Kent side of the fence on if we have something straightforward where the chair, vice chair, officers are able to take different circumstances into account to make a decision. I don't think it has to be a checkbox exercise because every case is different, but I'd lean towards in person unless there's a reason to have it online as well.
Thank you. Councillor Widdowson.
I'd just like to say I think it should be in person, unless there are very special circumstances, not just because somebody can't make it. Just building on what Jenny said, this is, if you want a licence, you really do have to come and ask for it rather than it's inconvenient, which is where I think it could be played. I also would like, I didn't realise we didn't need to webcast. So could we have a look at whether we should webcast, because it is a cost, and it's a cost that do we want it? I know we want transparency, but is it a cost if we don't need to do it? So there will be different reasons for it. So as long as there's a reason and a rationale, fine. But if we don't need to and it's not serving a purpose, I don't know how many people watch them, then is there a reason for doing it? I absolutely agree with Mark. Can we please move on?
Well, I've only seen one more hand, which is Councillor Mason. Oh, Councillor Mason, then Councillor Wells, and then there's been a couple of different propositions, so we'll have to, yeah.
I think the challenge you've got is, from what Leslie says, is that you've got to make a decision basically when the members are agreeing a date, how you then go forward. You couldn't then say, because a representative at the last minute or 3 days before says, actually, I've decided I'm not coming, well, we'll flip it online. And I think that's the challenge. So my recommendation would be that it's going to be based on when you set that date for members, it works and it's in person. I think if you can't get members to make an in-person meeting, or we've got to change the time like we had today, then fair dues, it can be an online backup. But I think it's got to be in person first, unless it's about the fact you can't convene 3 members to sit at that time.
Councillor Wells.
I don't have strong feelings either way, but I do think that if you're going to say, unless there's certain exceptions, everybody thinks that they're an exceptional case. And so I think it's going to be really, really difficult to drill down to say, yes, you are exceptional, we will do yours online. So I would prefer to go with an overall, either remotely or in person. I don't have strong feelings.
So there's been a few people, a few kind of proposals, but it sounds like they have kind of different bars of flexibility in terms of, you know, the criteria for whole, you know, what circumstances it could be online instead of in person. I think option 3, to be able to vote on it and all understand what we're voting on. If anyone's proposing option 3, I think we need something quite specific of, you know, if in person is the default, what are the circumstances in which online is acceptable? So a few people proposed some things. Can anyone propose again, just so we're exactly clear on what's being proposed? Councillor Mason?
I think option 3, but, you know, again, for the officers' sake, the caveat would have to be it only works if you can't get a panel of 3 people in person. I think you can't have any of the criteria because it just makes it too complicated and almost not workable.
Councillor Rose?
Well, I've got a counter option 3, but I don't know what we do if that's a formal proposal and what the steps through.
People can propose anything and we'll see what gets seconded and then take it in order of what is seconded first.
I guess my point of view is that it isn't just whether we can have the numbers or not that is a necessity, whether it's because of huge volumes of people or it's because of the circumstances of the application and the individual person's needs. So I would say at the point of application, absolutely acknowledging that you can't make the decision 2 days before the hearing based on information that comes to light later. That is the decision of officers and the chair and vice chair at the point the application comes in, if there's any reason for it not to be in person. So it's in person unless there's a decision made. But no rules put in place as to what those reasons are, because they know that the committee's feelings are in person unless there's a good reason not to, basically.
Just one point on that particular matter. When an application's received, we don't know if we're going to get any representations against it, so we don't know if we're going to need a hearing.
But the point that the hearing is identified as being needed, whatever the right phrasing is, but you know what I mean, at the first point where we're making that decision.
So you're suggesting complete discretion as to whether an online is required rather than any sort of public or pre-agreed criteria?
I think the discretion with the steer of the committee that in person is the default is as good as a checklist. Yes.
Okay. Councillor Smalley.
Just to prolong the meeting as long as possible. I'd like a mix of both. So I'd like Ashley's, sorry, Councillor Mason's proposal. I think is eminently sensible, with the position that the chair and vice chair should be able to, as well as the attendance of members position. Because I think, I take your point, Leslie, but actually it's pretty obvious when you have a festival application in a suburban area, there's going to be a lot more interest than, I know there's some circumstances where it's not obvious at all, and it just so happens lots of people are very interested. But generally, by and large, you could foresee a situation that attracts an awful lot of public interest. And on the webcasting point, I'd just add that the reason I had a lot of very disgruntled residents with the York Festival application is because it was a webcast and they didn't know exactly what was being said. And I had to go away and, as best I could, paraphrase. Now it's webcast, that situation will be an awful lot easier.
I think the webcasting thing is a slightly different issue, but we do have a solicitor on the line. Would people like more information about that now, or would people rather not go down that rabbit hole right now? Yeah, so we'll leave that as a separate issue right now and not go into it. Okay. Does anybody else have any views or anything they'd like to propose, or are people, or anything they want to discuss or debate, or are people feeling like they can move towards a vote? Yeah, Councillor Mason.
My only concern with Councillor Smalley's option is that I actually think the more scrutiny something gets, it should definitely be in public. It's up to us to find a venue that facilitates it if we don't have one. We've seen recently how we can, change places to make something work, and I think that's got to be the default. I think, it's not about putting it online for convenience of people watching, it's making a big enough space that people can see the in person. And that's my only concern with giving you the flexibility, is you might have one view of what you think is, or you and Ian or whoever it is, we've got one view of what that kind of steer is, but I might have a totally different option of, well, actually I think it should always be in person. And I think it's just for members' convenience. It's us that are giving up significant time. We do lots of hearings in York, probably a lot more than a lot of other authorities. So that's my only caveat, is that I think it should be us, not anybody else that we're bowing to.
So option 2 has been proposed, that hearings are in person, but with the caveat that in certain circumstances they can be online if necessary. And I think a very similar thing has been proposed, but as option 3, it's determined on a case-by-case basis, but the default is in person. They mean kind of the same thing. Was there also a proposal for option 1? No, option 2, just in person. Yeah. I think the first thing was proposed and seconded first, wasn't it? The kind of hybrid between option 2 and option 3 was proposed and seconded first. So I think we should take a vote on that first. And then if that vote doesn't pass, then take a vote on option 2. Sorry. In person by default, unless there is good reason for a need for it to be online, and that decision to be online rather than in person be taken by officers and the hearing panel. Is that what chair and vice chair of the committee?
What's a good reason though? That's the problem.
Yeah, I personally feel like we need something more specific than that, like it needs to be due to accessibility or due to some other sort of need, such as needing an interpreter, that sort of thing. I saw Councillor Waters first and then Councillor Widdowson.
Thank you, Chair. Might I just suggest that we vote on the 4 options as written, and if we don't reach agreement on those, then options with amendments. Because at the moment, I don't think anybody's got a clue what we're actually voting on. And if you went down as written, and if we don't reach agreement, then fair enough, propose something with amendments.
Can I approve option 2?
So I'll let Councillor Widdowson speak first because she had her hand up and then we'll come back to that.
If we can't do it that way, which I think is sensible, then what I would propose is the clearest one is we start with option 2, see what happens with that and then works our way through it.
I mean, something was proposed and seconded. No, okay. Is that what people want to do then? Just go through the options in order and take a vote on them?
Can I propose option 2? Do you want
Yeah.
to second it?
Seconded, okay. Okay, well, I think we've probably just about exhausted the debate on it then, so we'll do that now. Option 2, it's at the bottom of page 15. Do you want me to read it out or is everyone's, yeah. Determine that Licensing Act 2003 and Gambling Act 2005 subcommittee hearings will be held in person. And then we'll need to choose a start date for that change to take effect. So can I see all hands in favour of option 2? Those against? And abstentions? So that passed. Okay, all right, well, we've agreed option 2 then. Would the committee like to stipulate a start date for that change to take effect? Councillor Waters?
Would it be wise to ask officers when it's feasible to bring that change in before we make a date?
That we do have a large hearing coming up we've got a number of representatives for.
So is that the next hearing that it hasn't already been determined what the format of it's going to be?
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, we're still in the representation period for that application, so there's a chance that we'll even have more representatives. So yeah, we haven't set a hearing date for that as yet, so but it will be in September.
So it's effectively starting from now, all hearings where it hasn't yet been determined the format of it, from then on it will be in person.
Why don't we say for that hearing, if we got a 10.
So we're just discussing 10 applications because they have a much shorter turnaround. So if we say starting now and an application for 10 comes in tomorrow. 1st of September has been proposed. Anybody want to second that? And officers are happy with that being a reasonable, yeah? Okay, all in favour with 1st of September as being the start date? Yeah. Any against? Okay, right, passed. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I'm glad we're able to reach a decision on that. And I think quite a few members of the committee are happy that we've made a decision on that as well. There isn't any urgent business, so that's everything on the agenda. Thank you, everybody.
I did make a request for an update on the taxi situation to go on under urgent business, which was subsequently backed up by Councillor Mason. I wanted a specific update on the drive situation. I haven't had a response from yourself. I've had nothing back from officers. Why can't we use urgent business on a meeting that is only relatively short? I'm sure the taxi officers will be chafing at the bit now to actually give us an update.
So it's down to the discretion of the chair, and my view is that it isn't urgent business, and it's something that I'd rather we could do it in a more formalised way. It is something that's I have a meeting in the diary to talk to officers about it. But exactly what can be brought to committee and what's appropriate to discuss in public or what might be a private briefing, I don't know yet. And I don't think it really meets the criteria for being urgent.
Well, with respect, Chair, we've had a representation now for 2 meetings that's gone unanswered. He did raise the issue of the acne plates and 2 of them being handed in. I think they've even sold the vehicles because it's not viable. And when you see the situation out there, it's just out of control. It's like a Wild West situation with Uber. Is it any wonder that it's not viable for York drivers now to fulfil these criteria when they're losing so much work? And we're sitting back and allowing it to happen. That's why I've asked for an update. Dave's nodding. He knows the situation's out of control.
Yeah, we're not sitting back. Myself and officers and the executive member for transport are all discussing what the options are. But in terms of urgent business, I haven't deemed that it meets criteria for urgent business to be discussed at a formal committee meeting. We've done everything on the agenda, so I'd like to call the meeting to a close and we can discuss it privately.
To taxi drivers, it's urgent when we've got Eber races coming up, because that's another flashpoint where they're seeing their business disappearing in front of their eyes, and we are seemingly doing nothing about it as a licensing committee.
We're not doing nothing about it. We can talk about it now after the meeting, but this meeting now is drawn to a close. It's over.
Sorry, we've got no forward plan either on the agenda. So I suppose as a member of the committee, we've got no idea of when periodically things are going to come up that we know when we're going to get an update on certain things. So maybe that's what we need to work out for the next one, is having that clear understanding of when those things are going to happen so we know what's going on.